Hello my friends. Today I am making over some thrift store items that also serve as very useful storage. Let's get started. This first one is a paper mache box. I paid $2 for it. I'm going to go ahead and give it a coat of my Rust-Oleum primer in white. And now I have this decoupage paper from Stamperia. I'm going to cut this down into 3 pieces to decoupage around the perimeter of that box. I'm using DIY's Liquid Patina as my decoupage medium. I put my piece of decoupage paper on there, just laid it down where I wanted it to go, then folded it back, put on the Liquid Patina, and then smoothed it out. I'm going to do this with the 3 pieces, butting the edges up against one another. The nature of this paper makes it to where that's not a problem at all. It all looks like it lines up just fine. So the main thing was I wanted to make sure that that top was all in line so that I didn't have an uneven top edge there. Once that was dry, I sanded off the excess from the bottom with my finger sander and then gave this another coat of the Liquid Patina. I'm using this brown color called Nutmeg to paint that outer side of the lid. I end up not liking it, so I do change it later. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because of that. Now I'm going to take Stays on Ink and Timber Brown and my Kindest Regards stamp. I have this laid over a piece of coffee dyed coffee filter, and I'm just going to stamp around those outer edges. I don't need the ink in the center of this. It will be covered with something else. So I'm going to turn that over and just stamp that down onto that coffee filter. And then I will lift this up, look at the areas that need a little bit more filled in, and just add some more ink to my stamp and fill in those areas. I will leave a list of everything I used in today's video below in the description box. And just keep in mind that even though my projects today are a sewing theme, you could mix this up to make it whatever type of storage it is that is suitable for you or for someone that you would like to gift it to. Now I have this decoupage paper that I believe I got off of Etsy, and I'm going to use this one little round one here. I'm going to cut this out, and as you can see, I don't have a lot of border around it to work with. So when I paint my water on there with my paintbrush and tear this is rice paper, by the way, I'm really like right on top of the edge of that design. So I had to be really careful that I didn't tear too much into it and ruin the design. Now back to that lid, I wanted to bring that paint over onto the edge just a little because I don't want the white to peek through around the edge when I put this stuff on top of here. So that's why I did that. And now I'm going in with Fusion's cast iron to cover up that brown because I ended up not liking how it was going to look with the trim that I end up putting on there. Now I'm going to mix up some of Fusion's milk paint in the color Vintage Laurel. I'm going to take 2 scoops of the powder and then add 2 scoops of water. Mix that up really well and set it aside for about 10 minutes to let the water soak into all those pigments. And even with doing that, I still had a few little areas where the pigments weren't completely mixed and you get kind of like a gold streak. But it wasn't a big deal. I just kind of painted over it, and it just, then in the end you can't really see it. So I'm going to paint that outer rim area where the decoupage paper doesn't come all the way up to the top, and then I'm going to paint the entire inside of the box. I'm also going to do the lid, and I ended up doing 2 coats. Now this is some washi tape that I got from Temu. I'm going to wrap this around the edge of my lid. So I spread it out there, pull it back. I'm using Fabri-Tac glue for this. This is already sticky, but it won't be a permanent adhesive. So that's why I'm adding the Fabri-Tac glue. I don't want it to go anywhere. I'm going to carefully lay that down right in the center, smooth it out. And I do that again, this whole time not realizing that it's upside down. I could not, oh my gosh, I could not believe. So I ended up having to rip it off, repaint with the black paint, and then starting over with a fresh piece, doing it the right way this time. I'm going to seal that Fusion milk paint with my Jolie clear wax. I'm going to just use a cloth for this. I have these lint-free cloths that are perfect for this type of application. And I'm just dipping that cloth into that wax and using it to spread it around instead of trying to use a brush. And you might be surprised to find out that I don't do any antiquing wax on this. I just do the clear wax and call it good, because I tend to really always grunge up my stuff, and I thought it'd be nice to do something that's a little cleaner, a little brighter, and not so grungy. Although I do use the antiquing wax on this. I'm sorry. I couldn't take that the white border around that tape was just too white. So I'm brushing that antique wax all over that little washi tape and then wiping it back just so it blends better. Yeah, it didn't look right with the bright white border. Okay, so now back to the coffee filter. We're gonna decoupage this onto the top of the lid. And again, using the DIY Liquid Patina for this. And I will point out that the coffee filter seems a little more resistant than regular decoupage paper to being glued down, but it does stick well. You just have to smooth it out, give it some time to dry, and it'll work out just fine. And what luck was it that that coffee filter was the exact same size as the top of this lid. Now I'm going to spread some of the liquid patina on the center section because I'm going to glue down a 6-inch doily that I also coffee stained. I'm going to put this down with that liquid patina, and once it's dry, then I will apply the actual piece of decoupage paper that I cut out for this. I did add some extra liquid patina around the edge of the doily because it was a little thicker and just didn't seem like it was adhering as well. But I let the center be so that it would dry. I didn't want to oversaturate that. Before I put this piece on there, though, I wanted to go around those edges with, it's Pebble Beach by Archival Ink. I'm just grunging up the edge a little bit because it had like a white border, like where I'd torn it, it was kind of a bright white, and I just thought it would blend better with that coffee filter and the doily if I added some of this ink on there. For the bottom of the box, I just decided to go ahead and do my antique wax. I just did one coat, brushed that on, wiped it back, and that was it for the bottom. So now that that doily is all dry, I'm going to go ahead and add that liquid patina and apply my piece of decoupage paper. When that was completely dry, it's time to add my pearls on here. I've got this big spool of pearls I bought from Amazon, and I haven't really used them that much, but I thought this was the perfect opportunity. So I put some of that Fabri-Tac glue just on that edge the top edge, and then I'm going to carefully lay these down into that and hold them a little bit until they set up, and then snip off the excess. I didn't snip off quite enough, so I snipped off one more little bead there, and then glue those two edges together. They fit like perfectly. I really lucked out with a couple of things on this project. Up next is this little box that I didn't realize had this damage right there in the middle section. So I've got to address that, as well as cleaning it up, sanding it down, and then fixing that little spot so that we'll be ready to go for our project. I put some wood glue in a syringe, and I'm trying to squirt that underneath the raised section that something poked through, but it's not loose or anything, like it's just raised, and I couldn't get it pushed back down in there completely flush. So that's why I applied the glue, pressed on it as hard as I could, and then let it finish drying. It'll be okay in the end. I'm going to cover it up. I'm using Fusion's Chateau to paint. I'm going to paint the entire box, except on the, I don't need to paint the bottom sections of this. I'm going to call it a caddy. That's what I think of it as, a little artist caddy. Because I'm going to be covering that up, but I did want to go around those edges on the inside so that nothing, if I don't get it quite right, that wood won't show through. So now this is a mold I got from Etsy, and I think it's absolutely amazing. I used resin for one of the scissors and this little spool of thread. Look at the detail on that. Like, I don't know if you can see it. I just absolutely love these. They're just so detailed and so beautiful and so different. Like, I've never seen a mold like this before. So I cast them with the slow drying resin that's clear so that I could do a really good pour on these. I didn't want a bunch of over pour being rushed or anything. And then they both get a coat of the Fusion cast iron. I also have these little 3 buttons I want to use. One of them still had the little thing on the back there, so I'm going to nip that off, sand it down a little bit to make sure it's fairly smooth, and then I alcohol these off before giving them each a coat of the cast iron. The next step after that paint was dry was to do kind of a heavy dry brush with the Fusion Chateau. I'm going to do this on the buttons, the spool, and the scissors. Going to let that dry, and then I decide to add in some more color variation by doing a wash of brown. So what I'll do is take my brown acrylic paint, I think that's raw umber, water it down, and then I'm just going to brush this on over the entire piece and then wipe it back with a cloth. This will add another element of age to this that to me it was like too flat to just have the black and then the white on top. This just really kind of brought it all together for me. I mean, but that's just me. That's the look I was going for, so it worked out really well. I'm going to use that same Stays On Ink and Temper Brown and the Kindest Regards stamp again to go around the perimeter of the box. So I'm going to ink up just that center section. It was like the perfect size to cover this. And that way I get a fair amount of text on there without a lot of big open spaces to fill in. So I'm just going to press that down, and that's it. Like, I'm not even going to try and fill in any of the spots that weren't perfect. I'm just going to do that on every side of the box. Now once that brown paint was all dry, I'm going back over with a light dry brush of the Fusion Chateau again. Then I'm going to go in with my antique gold rub and buff and highlight all those little details that are raised. I'm really trying to not be too heavy-handed here. I don't want to overwhelm these with the rub and buff. I just want it to highlight the details. I'm going to do the same with the buttons. So now for the inside of that caddy, I want to put this black, the self-adhesive felt. I got this from Amazon. And I didn't trust being able to stick that down in there as it is. I just felt like that was going to be a disaster because it was such a tight fit. So I cut out a piece of cardstock that's slightly smaller than the felt, and I'm going to attach the felt to the cardstock. Then I'm going to use Mod Podge to glue that down. That'll give me some working time if I need to move it around. I'm just going to pop that in there, and it went in just fine. I didn't have to make any adjustments at all. I just had to smooth it out and glue it down. I'm going to repeat that process for the other two cubbies. Now it's time to glue on my castings. I've got the Titebond Quick and Thick kind of poured out onto my mat there, so I can just take this paintbrush and spread it onto the back of these scissors. It was kind of, small areas that my finger would have just made a mess of. So I'm going to get that one glued into place, then the spool, and then I'll pick up each button and put those on. I just take a paintbrush and go around the edges if there's any excess glue to wipe that back. And then I let this dry overnight. The finishing touch for this is some more antique gold rub and buff. I'm just going very lightly around the top and bottom edges and then around the edges of the little cubbies. I think some vintage feet on this would just take it next level, but unfortunately the ones I had just were too small for this size of this box. It just didn't look right. So I opted to just leave it the way it is. This next one isn't a thrift flip, but I wanted to make a little pin cushion. I've never done this before, so let's give it a go. I've got some watered down brown paint that I'm going to cover this large spool that I picked up from Hobby Lobby. I'm going to wipe that back with a baby wipe so it acts more like a stain than paint. The color looked pretty orangey, so I decided to add in some gray to counteract that and just kind of add a little more grunge to it so it would have a more vintage look. I have another roll of washi tape. This one I picked up from Amazon. It has a script on it. I'm using the Mod Podge just like I did on the tape measure one. I'm going to spread some of that onto that spool and place this right in the center. And just do the same thing I did with the other one. I'm going to continue to add the Mod Podge and just wrap this around until the entire spool is covered. So I have a piece of fabric that I have coffee dyed so that it's not a bright white background. I'm going to trace around that can to get a big enough circle to make my little pin cushion. and then cut that out. I ended up making this circle about 4 times the size of the spool. A lot of times they'll tell you to do twice the size, but I tried that and it was way too small. So now I'm going to take my needle and thread and just do a running stitch around the entire edge of that fabric so that I can gather that up. And then when I stuff it, I can pull those strings together and tighten that all up. So I'm going to go ahead and free my needle there and then just gather this up a little bit. And then I can start stuffing it with just some polyfill. I'm going to just keep adding until I get the fullness that I think I need. And then I can just pull it together, check it and see if it's full enough. And when I decide that I've got enough in there, I'm going to take that spool and trace a circle onto some cardstock, cut that out, and then I'm going to put that inside on top of the polyfill so that I have kind of a base to help glue this on top of the spool. I'm going to stick that in there and then pull those strings and tighten that all up and then tie a couple of knots to make sure that it's secure. And this was the hardest part because you really need somebody to like hold that down while you try to tie the knot so it doesn't come loose again. But I figured it out and turned out okay. I'm going to tie one more knot there and then trim off the excess. So I'm going to take a little bit of hot glue and just go in around that edge to glue that down so that it has more of a flat base. It'll make it easier to glue on top of the spool. Now, just like with that tape measure washi tape, I'm doing the antique wax on top of this one as well to darken it up a little bit. I just brushed that on and then wiped it back. Once that was dry, now I'm taking my Fabri-Tac glue. I'm going to add some of those pearl strands to this as well, just under the edge of the top and bottom of the spool. I'm going to work in sections, letting it set up a little bit before I move on. I'm going to wrap that around, completely around the top, and then I'll do the bottom. I took a little tiny piece of lace and just tied a knot around the center onto the front, and I also cut out this little rose from that lace. I did a fussy cut on that. I glued that on top of the spool, and now with the hot glue I'm going to add my pin cushion. And of course the pin cushion needs some pins. I took 3 of these little ones that have the white top. I'm going to add this pearl cosmic shimmer. I'm just going to put a little bit of that on my finger, kind of dabbing it on and then rolling it around, just so it coats the head of that pin with a pearl kind of shine to it. It's hard to see here, but it just helped it go better with the pearls on the spool. Thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate each and every one of you, and I hope you got some inspiration from today's video. Have a great week, and I'll see you next time.